Hi, Kenny. It's the police. We're a chat, mate. From the police station.
The man peering behind the gate had been hiding behind a secret for 41 years.
What fortitude? We need to have a quick chat with you.
Yeah, come on, then.
He, Kenny Wells, was the man who sexually assaulted a pensioner in 1980, changing his victim's life forever and shaking a quiet village to its core.
Come on then, dog.
Come sit on the sofa.
Police had been working towards this moment for a year after rebuilding the inquiry from cold case files and new forensic developments.
Kenny, okay, I'm arresting you for the rape and false imprisonment of Violet Brown and burglary at the Rectory Cottage, Colin-on-Justice on 6...
After 4 decades, police finally had their man. Justice at last, but for his victim, Violet Brown, it was too late.
She was 71 when this happened. She was a spinster. She'd chosen what life she wanted to lead. She was a happy lady up until then.
She was a devout Christian, very much involved in the church and the WI. She was quite a robust lady and was very much a part of the community in Colin-on-Justice.
This village near Marlborough was the only life Violet Brown knew. Violet Brown was asleep, alone, in her home here. It was the early hours of the 6th of November 1980 when she was awoken by the sound of breaking glass. 2 men burst into her bedroom, shone torches in her face, and then one, the man who she later described to police as the nasty one, raped her. Afterwards, the men fled, but they locked her inside her home. She tried the phone, but the line had been cut. Violet Brown was trapped. She waited by the front door for 4 hours for the postman to arrive so she could call for help.
It completely destroyed her life. I think it's fair to say, from the family's perspective. They said that she became a shadow of herself and she could no longer stay in her home.
She was never the same person again after this.
Everything she had known, her community, all her interests, she left behind to live with her sister because she could not live on her own anymore and was very, very fearful.
And eventually she had to go and live in a home because she became difficult to deal with because of what happened to her on that morning.
By the time Violet Brown died in 1996 at the age of 87, no one had been charged with her attack. Kenny Wells, who lived 20 miles away in Salisbury, became a prime suspect and was questioned the day after the attack, but police were unable to proceed to court.
Wells was arrested at the time. He was a suspect. He'd been a suspect all those years. He was arrested with 2 other people at the time, interviewed. There wasn't sufficient evidence to charge him.
What happened in Rectory Cottage in 1980 remained on file and was reviewed by Wiltshire Police last year.
It is a complicated and quite a painstaking process to go back and find all the original material, make sure that there is continuity of where that material has been, the evidential material, and also find our witnesses and assess whether we can use the witnesses today, because some of the people involved have sadly died since the event.
It's like a jigsaw puzzle to begin with, a lot of reading and sitting there thinking where to progress. You look at it like you do any case, where your main points of inquiries are.
It was the conviction of the double killer Colin Pitchfork in Leicestershire which changed everything in police forensics. This was 8 years after the attack on Violet Brown. His case was the first to use DNA science. DNA would go on to become an essential tool for investigators around the world. But would Wiltshire detectives find Wells' DNA on tapings stored from Violet Brown's case from 1980?
They were taping for fibres and cross-checking fibres. To think that they were able to lift a chemical compound, for want of a better word, off the clothing and the bed sheets that they didn't even know existed at that time. Yeah, it's quite incredible.
In respect of the bed sheet, the suspect was returned after being we examined against the database, and the suspect Kenneth Wells was identified as being the suspect, and the chances of it being someone else were 1.2 million to 1. In respect to the other sample that was taken from the night dress, the DNA hit there showed that it was Kenneth Wells, and the chances of it being anybody else other than Kenneth Wells were 1 in 1 billion. And that's as high as you can really get.
But to build the case against Kenny Wells, the team would need to find testimonies and old paperwork which had been lost.
Eventually, we got a search team, a police search team, to search our store to try to find it, and they found it. Speaking
to the people the witnesses that were around that day, what was quite amazing was that they all remembered, and they remembered the morning, specifically the vicar and the vicar's wife. They remembered that morning very well, very, very well, to the point the vicar could remember the postman walking up the garden path to deliver his post, or so the vicar thought, and he recalls him saying, "You've got to come next door, you've got to come next door." So to remember that 40 years on is quite incredible, but shows the impact that it had on the witnesses, not only the victim.
Hey, I don't know what you put me down, but I'm not doing nothing. Honest to God, I'm not.
Police arrested Wells in June.
No, it ain't too bad.
His reaction to it is quite amazing. He says to the officer that arrests him, "Are you winding me up?"
Burglary, I'm right. Are you winding me up, man, or what? Huh?
Sorry?
Are you winding me up or not?
Am I winding you up?
Yeah.
I'm not winding you up, no.
Seriously?
And he said that, knowing full well that he actually committed this offence, you know. In complete denial and almost chuckling away at the fact that he'd been arrested for burglary and rape.
I hope you got some proof for all this, pal. Hi.
It's fair to say he wasn't very contrite at all. The interview, we did the basic caution, and he was quite difficult in accepting and understanding of that caution.
I don't know. I said I don't understand. I've never been through anything like this, so I don't know. I don't know.
It took us a while to get through just that section, and that was an indication to us that he was going to be quite difficult throughout interview.
The scientist is saying that semen containing your DNA was found on Violet's bedsheet.
No comment.
Explain that to me.
I can't explain that. No comment.
Sorry, I didn't.
I can't explain that because there's no comment to it.
The DNA evidence suggests that you were the nasty one, described by Violet, who raped her during the early hours of the 6th of November 1980.
No comment, no.
Can you explain that to me?
No comment.
He's never yet given any reason. He hasn't said this is what happened. We don't know what happened. We can only go by what Violet said, and there's no reason to disbelieve that, obviously. But he doesn't give any defence to himself.
Kenny Wells pleaded guilty to rape, burglary and false imprisonment, but in mitigation he didn't offer a single word of sorrow or remorse for what he'd done. The judge said this is a case of the abject humiliation, threats and violation towards a vulnerable and helpless elderly lady. I can't even begin to imagine the psychological damage it caused. The judge sentenced Wells to 15 years in prison with a further 6 years on licence. Could this have been done before now?
I suppose once a scientific development takes place and we are familiar with the use of it, we will review investigations in order to try and progress and in order to prosecute offenders. Now, our major crime team will deal with live investigations in the sense of offences that have most recently happened that are most pressing in time, but some cases are slower to progress for obvious reasons, and the risk is somewhat reduced in relation to an offence that's happened last week compared to an offence a year ago or 2 years ago. It doesn't make it any less important to deal with.
There's potential that other things might be linked to him. Are investigations ongoing as to whether other things may be connected with this man?
There's always that potential when, and as you quite rightly say, it would be unusual if a person commits this on a one-off occasion that many years ago and doesn't go on to do it again. But at the moment, no, there isn't any evidence that Mr. Wells has committed any other offences. But we are looking at any crime in the areas that potentially he may have been in, and to see if there is any link DNA-wise with those.
I think it's incredibly sad that Violet isn't there to see her perpetrator caught. And he's been able to have a life for 40 years. The fact that we've managed to convict him now, although it hasn't given Violet much justice, it has given some to her family, and I think that's what you have to concentrate on.